The government has announced compensation of £100,000 each for thousands of UK victims of the infected blood scandal. It'll be given to those whose health is failing after developing blood-borne viruses like hepatitis and HIV, as well as partners of people who have died. We thought we'd speak to someone due to get one of the payments and find out how this scandal has affected them. His name is Mark Ward. Hello, Mark.
Good evening. How are you?
I'm doing okay, thank you, and thank you for speaking to us. So,
You're welcome.
Help us with your story, Mark. How did it begin for you? What happened to you?
Okay, so as a baby, my parents noticed that I was bruising very easily, and when taken to the hospital, they wrongly diagnosed me with a bleeding disorder. The authorities were called, and they also thought that my parents were assaulting me. I was taken at the age of 3 to Great Ormond Street Hospital in London, and there I was diagnosed with severe haemophilia, which is a hereditary bleeding disorder. And the way of treating that condition is, or was back then, the use of blood products. When I say blood products, if you imagine when you see the pictures of somebody going to give a pint of blood, they would take that pint of blood, they put it through a process, and they take off all the different proteins and chemicals. And my body doesn't produce the protein called factor VIII, and factor VIII is essential in forming clots. So because I don't make that, it means my blood doesn't clot, so I just will continue to bleed. It doesn't bleed any faster than anybody else. So, when you get a shaving cut, it doesn't spurt everywhere or anything like that. It just doesn't stop bleeding. It will just continue to bleed until I receive the treatment to put that clotting agent into the body, and then it forms the clot. So in those very early days, here in the UK, we had a treatment that was called cryoprecipitate. And that was made from approximately 10 up to 10 bags of blood. So sometimes cryoprecipitate would be from 1 or 2 regular donors, and that's how that treatment was made. The issues with that treatment back then was that all of the antibodies that people have in their systems, so for instance like chickenpox, mumps, measles, I never got that as a child, because in the blood products then I got everybody's antibodies along with other pathogens that were in that treatment. And then from there, as things progressed, listening to what you were just saying about Liz Truss with profits, because of profits, they found in America that rather than using 1 or 2 donors, they could use up to sometimes 60 to 100,000 donors. So all of those bags of blood were put into huge vats, mixed up, and then the treatment was shipped around the world. And so found its way to us.
It was 1984 then, Mark. You were a 14-year-old boy, and you went into hospital for a knee operation.
That's right, yes.
What happened when you were discharged?
Because of the haemophilia, the worst part about the haemophilia is if you bang your head, you can bleed to death from a brain hemorrhage. But also, it's crippling because it destroys the joints. You bleed into the joints, and is that what damages in it? So by the time I was 14, I was told I needed to have this operation on my knee, or I would be in a wheelchair. And in those early days in the 70s, life expectancy of a haemophiliac was, if you were lucky, 21. So I went into hospital. I was in hospital for 6 weeks. And as I was being discharged, my parents were wheeling me through the haemophilia centre at the hospital. And a nurse popped up from a hatch and shouted across the waiting room, Mr. and Mrs. Ward, would you like to know Mark's HIV result? My parents looked at each other and went, yes. And she said, positive, see you next time. And
she did not.
Yeah. I shall never forget that day. It's imprinted on my mind.
Come on, she shouted across a hospital ward you were HIV positive? And that's how you found out?
Yes. And then the following week, because of the knee operation...
And of course, Mark, you didn't even know you were being tested for HIV.
No, and at 14 years old, my parents should have at least been asked for their consent or spoken to and said, look, there's a danger because HIV is now being detected in these treatments. In the UK, we were lagging 3 years behind America. And in America, 10,000 haemophiliacs became infected with HIV through the blood products. And here in the UK, they basically sat back and watched what happened to haemophiliacs. So the following week, when my parents took me back, my consultant told us, tell nobody because it's a need-to-know basis, and we cannot guarantee your safety. And again, across the Atlantic in America...
But you're a 14-year-old boy being told this.
Yes, yeah. My mum had
how
to go
did you
up to
cope with that as a child?
When you're born with a disability, life is completely different. Everything is a challenge. You live in a world where people are constantly telling you what you cannot do. So you can't climb trees, you can't do this. I couldn't even go to a normal school, but my parents fought that, and I was the first severe haemophiliac in Hertfordshire to go to a normal school with terms and conditions. But when HIV hit, my mum had to go up to school every week to update the headmaster. And in other parts of the UK, haemophiliacs were already being excluded from school, whether they had HIV or not. So it was on the basis that if nobody complained, I could carry on going to school. But the hospital were saying to us that I probably wouldn't live long enough to leave school. So it was a sort of thing.
You were given 2 or 3 years to live.
Yes, yeah. And my parents were told, just make him happy, take him on nice holidays, just do what you want to do, make memories now. But as I say, being the stubborn, disabled haemophiliac that I am, I carried on as normal, and I carried on with my education.
Did the kids in school know you were HIV positive?
No. They couldn't know that. No, it was horrific, because of like I said, where I challenged the authorities and the system to go to a normal school. When I started in school, all of the children were got together beforehand, and they were told about this special little boy that was coming into the school. You couldn't hit him, you can't push him because he bleeds. And so all of these people knew about my haemophilia, and the more people that knew, the more I was protected. But when HIV came along, everybody knew you had this huge target on your back. So you basically went into school knowing that you were going to be attacked. And they were kids. Kids can be cruel, and they were saying some awful things.
So what happened to you? How cruel were they to you?
Oh, yeah. I'm not going to repeat some of the things that were said, but it was brutal. And as time progressed, I mean, the way that the media portrayed HIV/AIDS, that it being the gay plague, it was across all of the newspapers. And then with the media and other things, we were called part of the 3H club. So it was homosexuals, haemophiliacs and heroin addicts. They're the people that got HIV. And so, of course, when going into school, it was all of the homophobic abuse. People were saying, awful things about drug abuse. And I actually hated going to school. I didn't want to go to school. And at sometimes I did actually think, well, what's the point of me going to school if I'm going to die? But I didn't. I pursued, I followed my dreams. I'm absolutely mad on aviation, and I wanted to work with planes. And my careers advisor, who just sat rolling his eyes, because you could see him sitting there thinking, what's the point of this? This kid's dying. Why am I giving him careers advice? And when I said I want to work with aeroplanes, he just laughed and went, Puh. He said, they won't look at someone like you. And,
did he?
Yeah. It was so dismissive, because that was sort of this view. If you're disabled, you won't amount to anything anyway. According to the government, we were ill-educated cripples who wouldn't achieve much in life. So
did you prove them wrong?
It. Oh, yes, yes. I left school in May 1985 and I joined British Airways on the youth training scheme. Within 2 years, I'd been taken on permanent, and
Perfect. Brilliant.
1990, I flew to Australia on a jumbo jet and said, proved you all wrong.
Brilliant, man. Brilliant. What an incredible story. And you're one of the 4,000 people in the UK to receive this interim compensation. What's it mean to you?
Money can't take away the infections. It can't take away... I mean, the HIV is one thing. I was also infected with hepatitis C and a whole host of other pathogens. So you can't take all that stigma, discrimination away. You can't take away the fear. I also suffer now with post-traumatic stress disorder and phobic anxiety disorder. It's completely... When you imagine your dreams and you fulfil your dreams and they are just shattered and nobody wants to know why. To me, yes, okay, so this interim payment is to give those still alive chance to get their affairs in order. It gives us a little bit of financial security because, you see, I've got no life insurance. There's no huge pension because where I had to medically retire from British Airways, my pension is tiny because I was told I was dying. So it's some money. And if I could just take this moment, actually, Stephen, literally just before I've come on air tonight, one of our friends has sadly lost his fight this evening. So this is when people say 1970s, 1980s, 1990s, yes, these things began then, but actually the impact is still being felt today. And like our friend this evening, somebody passes from the impact of contaminated blood every 96 hours. So since the infected blood inquiry began, over 400 people have died. And before this interim payment is paid, which the government is saying by the end of October, we're going to lose many, many more. And my friend tonight was terrified he wouldn't see justice. He hasn't, but he's lost his fight, knowing that something will at least be done to help his now widow.
Mark, thank you so much for sharing your story with us tonight. It's really important to us that you've done so. And thank you, sir. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you for listening. Take care.
Thank you.